to this month's Arcview Access webinar on job growth in the cannabis industry. My name is Louis Hahn, VP at the Arcview Group. For those of you who are new to the Arcview Group, we're the cannabis and hemp industry's first capital ecosystem. Since 2010, Arcview has connected cannabis with capital with the industry's first ever investor network. Since then, we've evolved more sophisticated financial services to include a FINRA-registered investment bank, crowdfunding platform, venture fund, and strategic management consulting service. Our Arcview Access webinars aim to deliver investor and operator-relevant education about this new industry twice a month through topical discussions like these today and state spotlights with our town halls. And we know that the topic of jobs is top of mind for investors, operators, and those just learning about the space. The deep dive we'll be doing today will be on how to get a job in the industry, as well as on a jobs report published this past February in Leafly. Let me show you that jobs report in case you haven't seen it already. And this jobs report was authored by Bruce Barcott, Beau, Whitney, and Janessa Bailey. The headline of the report states that 321,000 full-time cannabis jobs were added last year. To put that in perspective, in the United States, there were more legal cannabis workers than electrical engineers. There are more legal cannabis workers than EMTs and paramedics, and there are more than twice as many legal cannabis workers as dentists. And we'll be hearing from authors Beau, Whitney, and Bruce Barcott, as well as from Aaron Ray from Proclinical, which is an executive search firm and Arcview Alliance partner, with their insights. With that, I'd like to pass it to Director of Community, Sarah Falvo from our team, who has a background in cannabis recruiting herself, to lead our discussion on job growth in the industry. Sarah, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Louis, and welcome everyone to our program today. I'm really excited to do this deep dive. I think there's a lot of important trends going on and a lot of data and also findings that came out of the report. So I would love to bring our guests up to the stage right now. So Bruce, Beau, and Aaron, if you want to turn on your cameras and your audio, that would be great. Welcome, gentlemen. And Aaron, all right, we have all of you on. So I'd love to go around and just have all of you give a brief introduction and tell us a little bit more about your background. So Bruce, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Barcott. I'm a senior editor at Leafly. I've been with Leafly for about a little more than 5 years and have been writing and reporting on the cannabis industry and legalization for about 8 years or so. I'm kind of the executive producer of Leafly's annual jobs report, and I'm thrilled to be back talking with the folks at Arcview. My first encounter was, I think, in 2013, a small conference room in Seattle with Steve and Troy and a handful of other people.
Love it.
So I love reconnecting.
Well, we're so happy to have you here, Bruce, and I can say that Leafly is one of my go-to sources for all cannabis information, so I'm really happy to be chatting with you today. And Beau, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I'm Beau Whitney. I'm the founder and chief economist at Whitney Economics. Whitney Economics is a cannabis research firm that does economic consulting and business consulting. I generally track the market very closely, be it adult use, medical, or industrial cannabis. I have global clientele. I also do business valuations and provide expert witness testimony in trials and legal proceedings and the like. I do a tremendous amount of economic research and provide data into the market.
I love that. And as everybody knows, data is king or queen. So we appreciate all your work, Beau. And Aaron, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in this space.
Hi, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Ray. I'm the managing partner at Proclinical Executive. We are a executive search and consulting firm we focus solely on the life science space with three main verticals being number one, biopharma and therapeutics, second being medical device diagnostics, and the third being cannabis and alternative medicine. Prior to that, I spent 4 years as the CEO of STM Canna, which is a equipment processing company based out of Spokane, Washington. Prior to that, I was an operating partner with a private equity group out of Dallas. And if we're going to go back even further, I spent 12 years before that in healthcare recruiting. So I'm kind of coming full circle back to my roots here at Proclinical.
I love it. I love it. And, as we know, good talent is sometimes hard to find. So it's great that you're working in this space and helping, a lot of companies advance their goals. So happy to have you three here. So let's jump in. Leafly Jobs Report. So how did it come to be? Beau, Bruce, why is it made? Tell us about it, the background, and how you came to basically work on it.
Sure. I'll start in with a little bit of backstory. The whole project started back in 2016 when I gave a seemingly innocent assignment to a freelance business writer. I said, hey, listen, we hear a lot of people throwing around numbers about how many cannabis jobs are out there in the legal industry. Well, can you just go out and pin down actually how many are there, right? 4 weeks later, he came back and he said, nobody knows. It's like, what do you mean nobody knows? What are you talking about? Like, we have BLS statistics for every industry, every job category. And he says nobody knows because the federal government really is the keeper of all this data around employment in various industries, various jobs through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And because cannabis still is federally illegal, they will not count cannabis. There's also, Beau can get in a little bit about NAICS codes and how they work in the sort of data stream. And there is no code, or was no code for cannabis at the time. But we also said, at the same time, we said, like, well, why? There's got to be a way to figure out how many jobs exist. I mean, we exist. We know dispensaries exist. We know bud tenders exist. And so we started looking into it, and really we found a very few economists like Beau who were working in the field and really digging in and trying to figure out how to start to create this data. And one of the early reports was from, I think it was the Cannabis Policy Group out of Adam Oren's group out of Denver. And they put out a report, I think in 2016, that used Colorado data to really establish a kind of baseline around how many jobs were supported by legal cannabis. And this is not just purely plant-touching jobs, but also some ancillary jobs and even jobs in, like media, like my own job with Leafly. We started making it an annual report as states opened up and the legalization movement grew. At a certain point, a while back, I met Beau and we started partnering on the report because we wanted some tougher economists to essentially bash around our numbers. That's like, making them as strong as possible. And as we partnered with him, it's been great. I've learned a lot, and we've also sort of evolved our methodology in terms of how we create the report. And then this year's jobs report was sort of unique because we were dealing with a pandemic year, and usually job creation tracks fairly steadily with revenue increases. And this year, we kind of saw the greatest gap between revenue increases and job creation. We had a revenue increase of about 71% year over year in 2020. We estimated about an $18.4 billion market nationally. But our job creation number only grew about 32%. To, as you say, 321,000 jobs now nationwide across, I think, 37 states. And I'll hand it off to Beau here. Beau, you want to talk a little bit about some of the factors that were really kind of interesting and unique to 2020?
Yeah, well, thank you for your kind words too, Bruce. It's been a pleasure to work with Leafly and as well as with Arcview, for that matter. We go back a long way as well. You mentioned the lack of data. There's a North American industrial classification system that issues numbers to business and business types and industries, and then that's agreed to by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and then the federal government is able to then track sales and economic progress throughout the entire economy. They can track jobs and taxes and use this in banking security and all sorts of things. So the NAICS codes are really, really important, but unfortunately, because of the federal illegality, they don't have them. So it makes it a lot tougher. So as a result, some of the ways that we've gone about looking at these, looking for this data is by contacting the regulators themselves and talking about how many businesses have you licensed, how many worker permits have you issued and the like. And then we've done some surveys in such a way that we get a feel for the averages associated with, processing or retail, cultivation and the like. So it's been a little bit of a CSI type of effort, and hopefully now that the NAICS codes are going to be refreshed later on this year, we'll have a little bit better infrastructure. But for right now, it's a lot of sleuthing. And so, yeah, this year in particular was difficult. And what we saw was that in some instances, there were labor shortages. People had to take care of their family members. Maybe they had to take care of their children because they weren't in school. And so there were labor shortages. And then at the same time, hiring managers were reluctant to actually bring on people because there was so much uncertainty in the market. And so there was this, and then others, added some jobs. I mean, we calculated that there was 77,000 jobs added year over year. And so that's pretty amazing given the economic conditions and all that. And so it's really a remarkable year full of surprises when it comes to jobs and employment in the cannabis space.
That's great. And I have to say, the work that you guys are doing right now is really affecting change, because these are the things that we need to do to build up to help push federal legalization along, because there's so many, stumbling blocks and hurdles for us just as an industry. But the more data we get and the more reports like yours is really what is going to push us forward. So thank you for that. I think that's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about state specifics? Maybe, who are the top few states who have the most growth? What are the types of roles that you're seeing more so in those states? That kind of data.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. This year we saw, California is, of course, perennially the top state for cannabis jobs, and we saw a nice bump there with 23,000 jobs created just in 2020 alone. So they're up to about 58,000 jobs, and that was sort of an indication of natural growth, but also an indication of more and more of the illicit market slowly coming over to the licensed market, and also some of those counties that banned cannabis businesses are slowly also opening up. One of the interesting things that we see that has sort of surprised us is the continued steady growth of sales and revenue in the pioneering states, Colorado, Washington, Oregon. They're still growing at sort of anywhere from 5 to 17% a year, which is healthy growth for any company, any industry. It's just that, when compared to states like Florida or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Oklahoma, it sort of pales by comparison. A lot of new jobs in Florida. We calculated that they were up to, upwards of 30,000 jobs now in the legal cannabis industry. They're still medical only. Number 3 as a medical only state is kind of amazing. Arizona was at about 20,000 jobs, Washington State, and Michigan at about 18. And of course, then we have your kind of gangbusters medical state of Oklahoma down there at 16,000. And then kind of rounding out the top 10 were Illinois and Pennsylvania, both at about 16,000 or so. And one of the things that's been interesting to see is to watch what happens and track what goes on when a state moves from medical to adult use. We've seen that in Massachusetts and Michigan and Illinois. And it's been interesting. I think, there's an immediate like at least doubling to tripling of revenue and jobs, but they kind of still continue to go on from there. 3 times to 5 times what the medical market was. That's still sort of working itself out as we watch those states that are going in this sort of second wave of adult use legalization.
And and one thing just to add on to that, the number of jobs that are created is really dependent upon the type of regulatory structure that each state has. So each state will be different. Some demand vertical integration, others issue licenses to anybody that qualifies, and there's all sorts of different structures in between. So the amount of employment benefits will be determined by the regulatory structure.
Yeah, let me just throw in two examples, extreme examples in the medical side. You have Oklahoma, which is essentially wide open, kind of a massive market given its state size, a lot of job creation. And then you have Minnesota, which is just still extremely tight on the medical side. And so very relatively little job creation there.
Yeah, and so what I'm doing right now is I'm providing inputs into state legislatures on what the economic benefit will be to bring in cannabis, either go from CBD to medical or medical to adult use, and then project out the jobs associated with that depending upon the structure. And then I provide insights and recommendations on the type of structure as well. And with the acceleration of reform in the United States right now, there's a lot of requests for this type of information, the economic impact of cannabis in the state.
That's great. And one of my favorite parts of the report was how you really gave a snapshot of state by state. So I thought just the way it was laid out, and you can really see it compared to each specific state, the top 10 was really, I love the way you guys did that. So anybody on the call who has not read this report, I definitely recommend you check it out. And, I think you guys said something interesting that I want to bring back up. A lot of people moving from that legacy market, illicit market, into the legal market. And it's interesting to kind of see those shifts and trends. When I was doing executive search and staffing a few years ago, it was really hard to get those cultivators that had that experience. We were getting tomato growers and tulip growers and those who were, wanted to get into the industry. But when we really wanted those OG growers, it was kind of like, pulling teeth but I think, they're becoming more accepting. They're understanding, you can get benefits, you can maybe get a 401k, those types of things. So, just trend wise, it's been interesting to kind of watch who's coming into the market now, I guess from the other market. But, let's talk about the impacts of some various things. So let's talk about safe banking. So that's the first one. What kind of impacts do you think on the job market and just trends will happen if and when that actually passes?
I'll give a top line quick answer, and then Beau, you can take it from there and go deeper. How's that?
Sure.
One of the things that we saw, in addition to the COVID pandemic this past year and looking at 2020, was that investment capital actually started drying up in the cannabis space back in 2019. It was I don't know. I sort of tracked it from the 1-year anniversary of Canada going legal, and people looked up at Canada, kind of looked at what happened over that year, and instant billionaires had not been minted. So that was a concern, and we saw a number of basically just the pool of capital out there that's available sort of shrink and shrink and shrink, and that affects the cannabis industry so much more than any other industry, because that's the growth money. Like there is no small business loan. There's no bank you can go to and say, hey, I need 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 to expand my business. We're doing great, but we need some help just to bust out and meet that demand. So that was one of the things we saw, and that's where safe banking comes in. And I'll pass it along to you, Beau.
Sure. So it is interesting that safe banking would be extremely helped out by having NAICS codes assigned to those businesses. And so I'm actually working with some of the senators to get language inserted into the Safe Banking Act to have Congress mandate the requirement for NAICS codes in advance of when they're deployed normally. They're refreshed every 5 years. But from a Safe Banking Act, the benefits that it has for employment is that it gives greater access to smaller operators in particular, and so that they can have greater flexibility in the running of their business, and it also gives protections to capital markets and the like, where you have there's more channels to get to do fundraising and to get monies, and it's this is particularly important because right now it's friends and family, or you might have to go up to Canada on a reverse takeover or something of that nature to gain access to the international markets. But with friends and family, that's about it, and you have to cash out your 401k. Another issue that's really salient is that you don't have bankruptcy protection, and so if you cash out your 401k and you go out of business, then there's a lot of wealth destruction. So the Safe Banking Act really helps legitimize the industry in such a way that it adds more protections to the businesses as the market evolves.
Absolutely, and that's so important.
But with safe banking and then we look at federal legalization, I think there's a connection there from the standpoint of how quickly will institutional real money that right now is on the sidelines come into the fold. I think Safe Banking Act is a start, but federal legalization is probably when you're going to see the real money that's sitting there start to come in and stabilize the industry from a capital perspective.
One other thing to add on to that's an excellent point, is that with the institutional investors that can come in, your cost of capital goes down, because right now, because you don't have banks, you're deemed a high risk type of operator, and so you're being charged premiums on top of what you would normally be charged as a normal business. And so your cost of capital comes down, and so that's always beneficial because you're paying more into your operations and less in interest and other charges associated with that. And that's really critical when your margins are super lean like they are now. The more money that you can free up, then the better. Another thing is that running a cash business is really labor intensive, and so you need to have redundancies and all sorts of protections to protect against fraud and theft. And by just having access to banking, you free up your labor as well. And then there's also the public safety aspect of this. There's been a series of robberies. I think there were 65 robberies in 65 robberies in 90 days, just in Portland alone, at retailers. One bud tender here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, was murdered. Another one had a gun put to his head and was forced to open up his safe, and he lost $225,000. So there's definitely a public safety element to this, and so I'm really pleased that there's finally been some headway made on this issue, because it's super critical.
Absolutely, especially the safety. I think we as an industry, our hands are tied for so many reasons and on so many things that right there, someone was murdered because we don't have legitimate ways of handling our money in this industry. So it's so important. So let's talk about something else that is near and dear to my heart. I think this is one of the biggest issues in the industry, the lack of interstate commerce. So, I'm in California, a big chunk of Arcview's in New York, and it's interesting just the dichotomy to talk about the products that are there and the products we have out here and the fact that they can't get them ever right now. So let's touch upon that and just kind of the impact that that would have on the market in general, on job growth and all of that.
Yeah, on the interstate commerce side of things, it actually gives more opportunities to the industry. And because you don't have to build up an infrastructure in one state because you may have supply, say, from Oregon or California. And so you can let other states go about what they do best, and it's more on the product manufacturing, the retail side, the distribution. And so you don't build up a infrastructure only to have it potentially collapse once full federal legalization occurs. But it also invites more people to enter into the market. And so it gives more opportunities for cultivators. It just expands the market. And then it also helps address the illicit market because the product is being produced and grown and it has to go somewhere. And so why not just naturally allow it to go about its course in business?
Absolutely.
It was I can't wait for interstate commerce to open, especially because, I know that there's so much growing that comes out of Oregon, obviously Northern California, but also Oregon, to supply much of the country. But then also on the East Coast, I'm excited for the moment when all those growers up in Maine can start supplying, New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. We don't have to try to grow cannabis in warehouses in Connecticut, or New Jersey. There was talk a while back about the possibility of interstate compacts between regional states that share borders, obviously on the West Coast, and that talk has kind of died down. But that was an interesting potential interim step, but I don't know that that'll happen. But I once that possibility opens up, it's going to be very exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just provided some data on a opinion piece, basically saying there's a law in Oregon that allows for Oregon to enter into interstate compacts for cannabis. And the author, I guess I was a co-author, was calling on the governor of Oregon to say, hey, Oregon's open for business. We just need other states to join with us. The local business journal pushed the governor on this, and she was a little bit hesitant in the fact that, she said, well, we're open for business, but we need other states to join us, right? And so she took a little defensive posture, but I think that there's still this conversation about interstate compacts or some other form whereby states agree that there'll be a supplier and customer type of relationship.
It's interesting that piece, that topic came up in a previous town hall. It was the New Jersey town hall, an Arcview New Jersey town hall in regards to that tri-state area of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and obviously the economic benefits to opening up interstate commerce. But on the flip side, we get back to the safety piece, and that is, if that doesn't occur in states, in the Northeast that are so highly congested, that leads to illegal activity. If there isn't some type of interstate, commerce that's approved.
Yeah, I look at the West Coast and I think of all of those growers in Oregon supplying the market in Las Vegas, like sharing a border. It's not the first thing you think about, but just demand down here and supply up here. It's right there for you.
Well, I think Nevada didn't Nevada declare a state of emergency when they first legalized if they didn't have enough cannabis?
Yeah.
That is an emergency. Well, let's talk about the dirty word in the room right now, 280E. Let's chat about that. So the impact, what is it doing to the job market? What is it doing to cannabis companies in general? Who would like to start with that?
Yeah, 280E is I've been really focused on this, and I've been providing inputs into the Senate Finance Committee and into Senator Booker's office and Senator Wyden's office. 280E drives up the effective tax rate for cannabis operators significantly. For some retailers, it's north of 50 or 60%. And so what happens here is that there's so much money being paid in federal taxes that it threatens the livelihood of the operation. And so when things get really tight, then things have to be cut, and usually it's either a job or it's healthcare benefits or what have you. The average dispensary around the country generates about $2.4 million a year in revenue, but in Oregon it's 1.4 million. And so there's not a whole lot left after you have your product acquisition costs, your labor, which averages about $500,000 to $600,000 a year in Oregon, and then taxes. So what's left? There's really nothing left. So even though the narrative in the media today is that there's record sales and record tax revenues, the cannabis operators themselves are really struggling, and a lot of this is due to 280E. I added just one other note on this. I added the additional tax requirements for having a tax increase from 21% to 28%, this proposed corporate tax increase. And if most businesses are C corporations in cannabis, this would increase taxes on cannabis operators by $6.8 billion over a 5-year period. Right now, even without that tax increase, the cannabis industry pays $2.2 billion more in federal taxes than they would if they were treated as ordinary businesses. It's a lot of money.
That's crazy. And I think you make a good point. We see people pitching all of the time and they're like, this huge market, we're going to make all this money, we're going to be millionaires, and I'm like, just wait, because that's a good point. I mean, retail is killing it on paper, but the back end, everything that they have to pay for, the taxes, the 280E, everything, like you said, really sucks them dry. So I think, when you're coming into this industry, you really need to do your research and really figure out what vertical makes the most sense for you in terms of what you're doing, because it's not a gold rush. It's not a gold rush. Everybody thinks so.
So the impact that 280E, specifically, even at $2.2 billion a year more in taxes, it suppresses labor by about 30,000 jobs per year. And that's a real big deal.
Yeah.
And you're right at a time where people are trying to enter back into the workforce. States are looking to find a home for their unemployed. Cannabis deemed an essential business, huge growth, and there's an opportunity here, but it's not being realized, and it's not being realized in part due to 280E.
Absolutely. So let's shift a little bit. Aaron, I want to speak directly to you right now, but let's talk about just jobs in the industry in general. So I'd love to hear, kind of what you're seeing in terms of trends and the jobs that are really hot right now, more or less, and also the type of people that are coming in looking to get into the space. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So from my perspective and where I do my daily, where I'm focused on a daily basis is in the executive level. So we're looking at Proclinical executive, we're looking at the VP level to the C-suite to the board. And as the industry grows, that just means more opportunity within leadership. And I think one of the biggest pieces that you're seeing in this isn't just in cannabis right now, but if you look at, for instance, if you go to Hunt Scanlon, which is a huge, one of the biggest resources for human capital, human workforce solutions, recruiting information, is the need for diversity. You pull up their site, and it's just sprinkled with articles or searches for chief diversity officers, or with the recent proposal from NASDAQ to the SEC, which was that they're pushing for a requirement that their boards have at least two members of diversification, whether that's a female board member or someone that represents an underrepresented minority, Black, Native American, or someone that identifies as LGBTQ. And I think that is a big piece that we're seeing, especially on the executive level.
It's really interesting. And so are people, when they engage you for searches, do they specifically ask for, candidates that are diverse and things like that? Are you seeing that a little more so lately?
I think so. And again, I think this is, obviously cannabis is where I spend my day. But, looking at just say the life science sector, I think you're seeing that across the board. And then, to on top of that, you're also seeing diversification from the standpoint of what are their backgrounds, from the standpoint of, you spend 4 years in cannabis and that's like dog years, right? I mean, the experience level is you're learning on the fly, and I can speak from experience to that. So you're seeing diversification as far as from life science industries, whether it's biopharmaceutical or med tech. I've seen a lot of executives and leaders come in from the CPG space. Branding is a big piece of cannabis. And so you're seeing a lot of success from that standpoint as well. And the other piece is, and this is a part of the industry that is going to continue to grow. We've talked about legalization. We've talked about interstate commerce, and the big piece that supports it all is supply chain. I think, Beau, you spoke, we had some conversations about that and how that piece of the market, once legalization happens, let's just look at federal legalization, but then global legalization, and how supply chain is going to be such a big piece of this business.
It really is. And so, someone who is not in the industry, do you have any tactical advice, just how to get into it? What do you suggest for people when they're looking to get into the cannabis industry?
Absolutely. Call Proclinical.
Aside from that, Aaron.
Aside from that, no, I think, it's really important to do your due diligence and do your research. Understand what you're getting into. To your point, it's not a get rich quick industry. It's not the gold rush. Do your research. Find out where your skill sets might fit in best in the industry and focus there.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important too, doing your due diligence. We say that all across the board at Arcview. Do your due diligence on the companies you're investing in. Do due diligence on the investors that you might engage for your company, but also do due diligence on the companies that you're looking to go work for. Google is a very powerful tool, I'll say that, and it is a very small industry. So I think also if you have connections in the industry, reach out to them and say, hey, what have you heard about this company? Because I think people are very excited to get into this burgeoning, industry that sometimes they're kind of have those blinders on to what's a good fit for you, culture-wise, comp-wise, all of that. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of COVID. What have you seen over the last year or so in terms of hiring, scaling up within companies and things like that?
I think it's, as you've seen from the report that Bruce and Beau discussed, obviously the job market is expanding. It's increased. There's more jobs. I think the sliver of silver lining throughout the pandemic from a job search or workforce perspective is it's really opened us up to being able to work in larger geographies than we used to. It's the technology. I know everyone's kind of tired of Zoom right now and ready to get back to actually, interacting with people on a one-on-one or just a group setting. But I think that's also created a lot of jobs. And I'll speak from experience. When I joined Proclinical in November, we didn't have a Denver office. We had offices in LA, San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. And if I would have joined them, a year or two prior, I might have had to move. But because of that, I'm here in Denver, and it's obviously a great place to be for the cannabis industry. But I think you see that not just in my business, in recruiting and executive search. You see that all throughout the industry.
Absolutely. And would you say that you had a rush of people reaching out to you during the pandemic? Because I feel like a lot of people kind of, had epiphanies about their own situations and things like that. And did you see a new rush of candidates?
I think it ebbed and flowed. In the beginning, I think there was a bit of trepidation from the hiring standpoint of, okay, how is this going to impact the industry? But for cannabis, which was deemed essential, I think it proved, we weathered the storm and then grew. So it actually came from both the demand for leaders as well as candidates applying.
Absolutely.
I think the essential business designation was huge for cannabis, not only from an employment perspective and having people participate that from other industries that wouldn't have normally considered it previously, but it also helped expand the consumer base, and it invited more people to participate from a consumer perspective. So it was, and when you have more business, you need more workers. So this is that essential. I don't think people should underestimate the importance of that essential business designation at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that point about what the pandemic has done, which is in my company, which is I think this especially applies in non-plant touching companies, because when you're plant touching, you are really often constrained, within a state border, literally. And 2 years ago at Leafly, when we were looking to bring on people as new hires, one of our first questions was always, well, would they be willing to move to Seattle, where our head office is? And that question is gone. And it's very exciting to now, for us, it opens up a whole another level of applicant pools. And we have people just on the editorial staff in California, in Missouri, in Washington, all over the place. So I think it's especially true for those companies that are like Leafly, aren't constrained to one state.
Absolutely.
One thing that the pandemic did is it changed the business models to a certain extent of some of these retail operators. They were more amenable towards delivery services. And they were also able to expand their brick and mortar revenues by offering curbside services. So they were actually able to get more people through the transactional stage over the course of a day. And I think that is going to continue to reshape the industry from a consumer business interfacing experience.
Definitely. And so one last question, Aaron. So let's talk about cannabis culture within a company, culture within an industry. How is it different? And what are your thoughts on that? Because I have my own.
Well, I think that the number one thing is you have to be open to collaboration. I will steal from Lewis, who always says you have to be comfortable with the ties and the tie-dyes. And that's just so true. I mean, when you look at the culture of a successful cannabis company, whether it's ancillary or MSO, cultivator, producer, processor, you're dealing with people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different skill sets. And so having a collaborative mindset is extremely important.
Absolutely. And I think, at the end of the day, everybody in this industry has some sort of passion for the plant, whether it healed someone in their family, has done something for them personally. They just believe in, various, things about the plant. But at the end of the day, because it is still such a new industry legally, there's a lot of hurdles. There's a lot of pivots. So you have to have a strong stomach to be in this industry, no matter what you're doing, even if it's, the picks and shovels of the world, whether it's plant touching, all of that. At the end of the day, you have to have some passion for the plant. That's what I've seen. So I don't know, but everybody has their own journey into this industry, but we're so happy to have you guys on here. We're going to stop now and take a couple questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. And Lewis, do you want to ask? I know there's one in there right now, so go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. That was a really great discussion. I learned a thing or two about the job growth in the cannabis industry. And we've got a couple questions here. Some of them came in through chat, some of them came in through the Q&A. But let's see. First question is for Beau and Bruce, and Aaron, of course, if you have thoughts, jump in as well. But let's talk about diversity for a moment. I know in the Leafly article you highlighted Black entrepreneurship as executives and leaders in the space. But what did your research reveal about representation in the cannabis workforce overall, whether that is by race, gender, sexual orientation, or any other categories that you researched? Could you talk about that?
Sure, I'll give a short answer to start out. We focused on Black entrepreneurs in the cannabis space this year in the jobs report, and the statistics there, the data there is not where it should be by any means. The data is difficult to come by. We partnered with Cannaclusive, that they're one of the only organizations that tracks or has a database of Black-owned, woman-owned, Latinx-owned businesses in the world, really, and their data indicated that Black Americans are about 13% of the national population, but they represent only basically 1 to 1.5% of all cannabis company owners, and part of it, I think one of the things we've learned over the years is that it's not just about having a certain number of equity licenses available to people of color or people from traditionally underrepresented communities. Because if you hand a license to someone and they don't have access to capital, that license is essentially a dead license. And because, as we mentioned before, so much of the startup capital, the expansion capital in the cannabis industry is related to family wealth, is related to your ability to get a home equity loan or line of credit or second mortgage, essentially. And as many of us have learned over the last few years, those are opportunities that were denied to Black Americans over the generations, and so a lot of that, that housing-based wealth or that family-based wealth isn't there to draw upon. One of the things that we've seen, though, is that's a positive trend more recently, is almost like a new version of what Arcview had to do back in the day. I mean, I think, as I understand it, Arcview was created because it was difficult to find angel investors or funding at all. And so the initial creators of Arcview were people who were in the cannabis industry who wanted to support other cannabis companies that were coming up. And we're seeing more of those types of operations. I know Good Tree Capital is a group that works on creating more equitable models for cannabis business lending. Jay-Z announced a $10 million social equity fund in the last year or so, backing minority-owned startups. I know, full credit to Ease, which has put a lot of money into the Momentum Incubator, providing about 10 cannabis businesses with money and access to expertise and knowledge that can help them out. So we're starting to see, momentum from within the cannabis industry, but it still is difficult for those folks to access capital to simply start up their companies.
That's very true. There's a group here in Denver too called Suite 420, and they just launched Suite 420 Access, which was it creates social equity and financing for the cannabis space. So definitely seeing more firms and groups that are going that way, which is great.
One of the things that I called out in my inputs into Congress on 280E was that as federal taxes squeeze the operators, what it's doing is it's forcing consolidation into larger firms, and this is having a negative impact on minority-owned businesses, female-owned businesses, smaller businesses. And so without some additional reform at the federal level, either via tax or banking and access, there's still going to be this pressure put on minority-owned businesses. They're really, right now, somewhat set up to fail, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And Aaron, what you're saying about Colorado too reminded me of how Colorado just signed maybe just in the last month a $4 million fund. It's like a quasi SBA fund to support minority-owned businesses, and that very much acts as a state-sponsored lending program, kind of like what the SBA does. But even the SBA is shackled from lending to small cannabis businesses just because of the whole federal illegality issue. Now, next question I'd like to also ask is just about the division of back of house versus front of house. So Samantha Dickinson asked this question: from the data and research that you did, how does back of house like grow and operations, et cetera, compare to a front of house sales, marketing, et cetera, in terms of number of jobs, the 321,000 jobs that were added last year in 2020? Did your research get that granular?
For the purposes of this report, it didn't get that granular, but Beau may have done more research on his own. You want to address that, Beau?
Yeah, sure. So if you split up the jobs by function, about a third of them are related to cultivation, a third of them are related to retail, and then the other third is split between delivery and product manufacturing. And so, but it really depends upon your regulatory structure once again, because some states don't even allow for oils or waxes or what have you, and so, it eliminates opportunities in the product manufacturing sector. But I think, but the product manufacturing, interestingly, pays the most in terms of wages. And so you've got fewer jobs, but you've got really good high-paying jobs as well.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Aaron, this question's for you. You mentioned that you fill up positions in the executive space. What's the hottest job type that you're hiring for? Is it CEOs, CFOs? Is it the chief diversity officers? What's coming across your desk lately?
Recently, we've had an influx of CEO positions, and those positions have been tied to startups. So when we talk about building out an executive team, it starts with the CEO. So we've seen a lot of groups, both in the cannabis space as well as alternative medicine, psychedelics, really kind of starting with the CEO, and then a lot of times building out their fundraising depending on who that hire is.
Okay, thank you so much. And a last question, might be the last question. Let's talk about skill sets too, Aaron. Let's say you're here trying to fill a position for a candidate and you say, gosh, I really wish this person had this skill set, this experience, right? What is the most common gap that you see with these candidates when you're trying to fill a role for them?
I think is something that can't be solved today, and that's experience. There's just a small pool when it comes to cannabis experience from a leadership standpoint. So I've now to flip to people that we bring into the industry. I've seen a lot of success from the pharmaceutical space, biopharma. I've seen success in CPG, but one thing I didn't touch on is an industry which is the energy space. The energy space is contracting. Oil and gas is not what it once was. Being from Oklahoma, I speak from experience. We lived and died by oil and gas. And I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing the cannabis industry, even though it's just medicinal there in Oklahoma, is really exploding. It's because of that. So I've seen a lot of an influx of energy executives moving into cannabis and being successful as well.
Aaron, can I ask what anecdotally, I feel like I've seen more success with people who have experience with heavily regulated industries. Is that true or not? What do you see there?
I think yes, absolutely. And then it's funny because they get into, especially here in the States, where you go, each state is its own country when it comes to the laws and the regulations. So being able to adapt to new and different regulations is key. So you're absolutely right.
Sarah talked about culture. She asked a question about culture. When I was the COO of a small publicly traded company in the cannabis space, vertically integrated, I had to kind of reshape the culture of the business, because on one hand, you have this heavily regulated business, and you've got executives coming in from heavily regulated areas. But on the other hand, you have a culture that is used to bending the rules, and they're used to, like finding ways not to adhere to the rules. And so it takes a great deal of time, and it takes a lot of leadership by example to be able to blend those two cultures together, efficiently and successfully.
Absolutely. There's Lewis's comment, the ties and the tie-dyes. Right there.
There you go. Anyone on this call, including the listeners, feel free to steal that one if you like. Awesome. Well, that's all the time that we have for this discussion. Thank you so much, Aaron, Bruce, Beau, Sarah. Really interesting discussion about just how cannabis is becoming the next great American industry. And as we rebuild our economy post-COVID, it's just great to hear that people can find illegal jobs in cannabis, and that is one of the fastest growing sectors in this regard too. Now, for those tuning in, the conversation isn't over. First, you should be seeing a poll on your screen. I saw some comments in the chat about wanting to connect with the speakers here, so you can do that if you mark your interest there. Also, I know we weren't able to get to all the questions, and so if you'd like to join us afterwards, we'll do an even deeper dive with experts on Arcview staff. So please join us for breakout rooms. We'll be dropping a link in the chat here. Click on over and you'll get a chance to connect with our venture fund team, our strategic management consultants, and to continue discussion about fundraising, investing, jobs, or anything else. Be sure to complete the poll, though, before you head on over. While you're filling out the poll, let me just tell you about some upcoming events that are coming up here. First, we have a Women's Inclusion Network and a mentorship workshop just for members only. Well, the Women's Inclusion Network is how we celebrate female leadership in the cannabis space, but you don't need to be an executive necessarily to join the Women's Inclusion Network. That event will be next Monday on May 3rd, if you'd like to join us for that workshop and sign up as a member. That's at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. And Arcview CEO Kim Kovacs will be delivering a keynote for the second annual Industrial Hemp Online Conference live in Sweden. The world is opening up, and yes, Kim's going to Sweden, and she'll be delivering a keynote there on May 5th. So if there's anyone on the call who's calling in from Sweden or thereabouts, be sure to say hi. Arcview is also proud to announce that we're having our first public conversation on psychedelics. We touched a little bit on that here, but we'll be talking about the future of psychedelic medicine investment led by Arcview Capital, one of our business units, and that's going to be on May 6th next week at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. It'll be 2.5 hours chock full of education about the science, investment opportunities, pathway to capitalization on something that's very near and dear to, we know, the Arcview cannabis community. Many of you see cannabis as the first domino to fall, with other plant-based medicines soon to follow. So we're really excited to be having our first ever webinar and public conversation about psychedelics next week. We'll also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, in addition to these topical discussions like on job growth in the cannabis industry, we also do state spotlights. And we talked about Oklahoma, about how it's one of the most open and free market states in the country. Nearly, or perhaps even at this point, over 10,000 licensees. To give you a point of comparison, California has about 8,000 or 9,000 licensees. So we'll be doing a deep dive with local experts, industry leaders there in the state of Oklahoma, and that's on May 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And at the end of May, our next Arcview Access will be on diversity and social equity in the cannabis space. We want to highlight all the progress and milestones that we've made, but as well as the huge amount of work that we still need to do in the space, and some exciting announcements from Arcview's end on what we're doing to further the mission of equity and social justice in cannabis and hemp. Now, with that being said, let me post the breakout room link one more time here, just in case you missed it and you've been busy filling out that poll. And I hope to see some of you over in the breakout rooms to further this discussion. Again, whether you're interested in learning about investing in the space, raising capital, or continuing the discussion about job growth, we're happy to have you over on the next call. Thank you so much, everybody, and for your time. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much.